Welcome to the Agency Founder Podcast. Are you ready to grow your marketing agency? We pull back the curtain to show you how real marketing agency founders struggled, built, and scaled their agencies. Practical advice, lessons learned, wins, and losses. We hold nothing back. Now your host, Jeremy Sonny.
Welcome to the Agency Founder Podcast by Moonshine Marketing. Every single week, we interview successful founders of marketing agencies at different points in their journey to pass on their victories, defeats, challenges, and lessons learned to help you take your agency to new heights. This week, we're speaking with Taylor Holliday of Common Thread Collective, a digital growth agency. Taylor, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeremy. Excited to jump on and share. I love that intro of victories, defeats, and lessons. So definitely have many of all of those things. So hopefully we can offer something of value here.
You know, I think that really it's more about just that you have slightly more victories than defeats is how you move forward. Like, I don't think
Exactly, but get to 51% and you'll do all right.
Yeah, absolutely. So really appreciate you coming on the show. You're a big fan of traffic campaigns, right? That's how we connected.
I figured that had to be the intro for how we ended up here together. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically for background, for people that don't know, Taylor and I had a very good and productive discussion of differing points of opinion. Of course, he's probably right, but I'll never admit it. That traffic campaigns aren't effective for conversions focused campaigns. And, we had a good exchange back and forth on Twitter and, messaged him afterwards and said, hey, I appreciate the exchange. And he's like, yeah. And I go, you want to be on the podcast? And so here we are.
Yeah, and I so appreciate you reaching out too, Jeremy, because one of the things, man, that's so hard about Twitter is we don't know each other. We've never met. For all you know, I'm a horrible asshole, and intonation is so difficult to sort of sort through. So it's always great when someone on the back end of a conversation like that just sort of humanizes it and just realizes that, like, nope, we're actually both good dudes and would love to chat with each other and be helpful. And sometimes that gets lost in the Twitter sphere. So I have found actually repeatedly, though, that in our community, and I say our community meaning e-commerce, Twitter, I guess, calling that a little subculture, if you will, that has consistently been my experience, though, is that people are eager to debate publicly for the sake of the community. And then on the back end are also incredibly kind, gracious, and generous as well. So it's become more and more safe of an environment for me as I've gotten to know more people directly, just that there's a lot of good humans there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's an important point to definitely humanize it because I think that you can have really intense debates, but you do lose some of the nuance of having an in-person discussion with tone and things like that as well, where, you can have an intense debate that's really productive and, people are really trying to just genuinely learn from one another. And yeah, I think we were able to achieve that, which is cool. So yeah, anyways, so tell me about yourself a little bit. How did you sort of get into marketing? What's your background pre-Common Thread Collective?
Yeah, so definitely very much an accidental entrepreneur. I grew up playing baseball my whole life. So I was a professional baseball player, played in the Yankees organization out of college. And then I met my wife in Charleston, South Carolina, playing for the Charleston River Dogs. And then that summer was my last year. I got released by the Yankees. And I had a really good friend, my childhood best friend, that he and his brother were starting a company called Power Balance. I don't know if you remember those silicone wristbands that athletes were running around wearing for a minute back in the day. So when I was finishing up my last year of school, because I was drafted as a junior in college, I went back and was finishing up my last year of school. And in between, I would show up at my friend Josh and his brother Troy's little office. And it was the three of us and our buddy Ryan, one other person. And we would mainly mess around, but my job was to show up in between class, print the orders off the website, package them up, and take them to the post office. And it started as, four of us in a little room, sewing together wristbands, ironing on logos, mainly just messing around. And then through one of the craziest rides, that's a story totally in and of itself, that company went from 0 to 60 million in about 22 months. It was an absolute explosion. And when that happened, we sort of looked around and went, wow, this is like a real business. What's your job going to be? What's your job going to be? And they looked at me and they said, well, you're the youngest person, so why don't you figure out e-commerce, social media, and some famous people, so why don't you be our influencer marketing manager too? And I was like, well, okay. And that sent me to Google, how do you set up a Facebook page and what is Magento? And the rest was history. And that was, almost 12 years ago now. And I just happened because one, I was competitive and didn't want people to think I was in the company because I was friends with the guy who started it. So I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. So I became obsessed with learning everything I could. And it just happened to be that became a valuable skill in the world. So I got really lucky in that sense. So from there, I actually went and joined our agency of record that I had hired. Their founder and I became really close friends. His name's Zubin Malavi. He ran an agency called Lucid Fusion that was just acquired by VaynerMedia. And he and I became really close friends. And it's funny because I used to think the agency business was really stupid. I would always tell him, like, why are you doing this? You're just building somebody else's dreams. Why don't you build something of your own? And he was like, okay, well, why don't you come over? I'll let you use all of our internal resources and you can run a lab inside of our agency. And your job will be to try and create passive revenue for the agency. And so he basically gave me a blank check to come in and use their internal resources and build stuff. And that was like, it was my first sort of entrepreneurial step personally. It was a huge level of trust from somebody that I just deeply appreciate now in my life. And I got to spend a year and a half just trying stuff, from building software interfaces for med device companies to building social commerce products to doing all sorts of weird things, Facebook apps back in the day on pages, like just all sorts of weird things. And then at that time, a good friend of mine named Jordan Palmer, he and I are the co-founders of Common Thread Collective. He brought me a project for a baseball apparel company that one of our friends named Brian Garofalo, who's now the CMO of Igloo Coolers, was starting. And Jordan played 8 years in the NFL. He is 6'5", super charismatic, the most like just relational person in the world. And the way I always describe us and why we're such a good compliment for each other is like, he's great at galas and I'm great behind a computer. And so it was like, you go find the business, I'll do the work. I know I've got this sort of experience in marketing and growing a business. And so that became, from there, our journey into CTC. And we knew that we always wanted to get back to building brands because that's really our passion. Is like, we fell in love with entrepreneurship. We fell in love with the process of growing a business. And so CTC was always part of the vision. And now we have sort of this ecosystem where we have the agency and Common Thread Collective. We have 4x400 where we acquire and operate our own businesses. So we own 4 of our own brands there. We have a company called Left Brain Logistics that does pick, pack, and ship and e-com. A company called Tell Me Your Dreams that does culture development. So we have this really rad ecosystem now about helping build and develop businesses that was sort of born out of just our passion for seeing companies come to life based on our own experiences.
That's a really incredible journey. I love hearing about all of that. I have kind of a weird question that popped up to me in the middle of it. Do you think that like former athletes or athletes make really great entrepreneurs? Because I kind of see that a lot. Is professional athletes or semi-professional athletes becoming very high performing entrepreneurs? Do you think there's like some sort of common like DNA thread there? Not to be too punny with common thread and thread.
We have this value inside of CTC, and it's this idea that everybody's the entrepreneur of their own life. And one of the things that sports forces you to deal with early on, especially as you get to the professional level, is that your body, your skill are the business. And your care for the direction of your life is reflective of how far that quote unquote business will go. And so from a very early age, as an athlete, you're sort of built into this mindset that your discipline, your behaviors, and very clearly the outcomes you create define your opportunity. And so I think that sort of wiring is very ingrained into athletes, that we exist to produce outcomes, and there's a discipline and process that affects those outcomes that is really useful in building a business. So I don't know that it's like a one-to-one, all athletes are great entrepreneurs by any means, but I definitely think that there are disciplines and lessons that are learned in athletics and sports that are really useful for entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Have you ever read Nick Saban's book where he talks about like the process and like how, like the goal is to just basically dominate every play and only focus on what you're doing in front of you and do you think that there's a lot of merit to that? Would that be like your experience?
So I think that's exactly sort of the mindset, is that there's so much of that. And Nick Saban's an incredible coach. And have you ever seen the Bill Belichick, Nick Saban videos of the HBO special that they did on the two of them?
No, I haven't seen the videos of that. I've seen some things that Bill Belichick's written about Nick Saban, which has been interesting.
So they're both incredible. I'm more of a Dabo Sweeney guy, to be honest, but I think that the methodology is right here, which is this idea that execution on the next right play at the next right moment, blocking out all the noise of everything else that surrounds you and just executing against the plan over and over and over and over again. And that the sum total of all of those behaviors, it's sort of what we started this podcast with, right? Which is that like, you're going to win, you're going to lose, you're going to win, you're going to lose. But if you do the next right thing and you do it and you have attention to detail and you focus, the sum of that over a long period of time is likely going to be a positive outcome, right? I mean, in baseball, it's like sort of a cliche to say that you fail 70% of the time, but that's sort of the reality. And I think that sort of mindset of being able to try, fail, try again, fail, and just repeatedly go after learning and improving is a really, really valuable skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would completely agree. And not to harp on this point too much, because there's a lot of interesting things I want to talk to you about. But like, it's interesting too. I think that the mindset of like that win fail ratio. You think about somebody on like Wall Street. If they got 60% of their investments right, they'd be a luminary, right? They'd be the greatest investor of all time. So I think that a lot of people think that like being a winner means that you have to win every single time. And it's no, you have to figure out how to engineer the outcome of winning most of the time, and that's what moves you forward.
And even it's funny, I have this thing with my kids. So I have twin boys that are 6 and I have a daughter that's 3. And they are, especially the twin boys, they're super competitive with each other. And they're hyper aware of the performance of the other person. And so we've developed this moniker that I'm trying to instill in them, is that there's no winning and losing, there's winning and learning, where you're sort of trying to develop this ideology, that this sense of like, I lost, I'm bad, this identity and shame that's associated with losing is crippling. And if you can somehow figure out to turn that into, my defeats are simply a ground for learning, like that is a superpower. If you can be that person that's unafraid to lose and you see it only as an opportunity to refine your approach and do better the next time, like you will become an incredibly powerful person. Like one of my coaches used to always say, the person that succeeds is the one that's not afraid to look bad trying, right? And it's sort of the same principle, is that like if you're unafraid of failing, if you're unafraid of the opinions of the people around you, then you're going to have the opportunity to do so much more.
No, that's absolutely huge, and I love hearing that. So shifting gears a little bit, tell me about kind of what was like kind of the early days of starting CTC like, how did you get started? You kind of talk about how you were the one behind the screen, your co-founder was the one that was kind of out at the galas. Like talk to me about that dynamic and the early days.
Yeah, so I think in the early days of most agencies, from anybody I've spoken with, so much of it is just survival. You're looking for the next opportunity. So we had a relationship with a company called EvoShield. So EvoShield was a sports protective gear company down in Atlanta. And when we were running Power Balance, we became really close with the founders of that company. And so our first client as an agency was basically to be their in-house marketing leads. I had sort of come in and acted in some ways as their like VP of marketing, where I was providing strategy and direction, and my team was handling some of it. And then we did a lot of like influencer deals where we brought in and built campaigns for them. So we spent a long time with this sort of core foundational client that we were more or less an outsourced extension of their team. And then from there, we were able to start layering on more clients. And in the beginning, our business was a lot of consulting. Like we were not doing much of the execution. We would provide strategies, ideation to internal teams for execution. And the idea that we sort of were taking to market is like, hey, we've built businesses particularly into the sports world. We can help you navigate this landscape, build relationships with the right people, be introduced to the right vendors, the right retailers, that sort of thing. And so our company was called the Arch Network. And the idea was that we were going to be the bridge to the people that you need to know. Like we were going to play this intermediary role. So we did that for a lot of times. It was mainly just consulting, the two of us running around trying to get as many deals as we could. And it's funny because in those early days, we made a ton of money, but there was no equitable value in the thing at all, in the business at all. It was just like freelance consulting month to month, and people were writing us nice checks. But the reality was the second they went away, the business had no value. There was no asset at all. And that, I think that's fairly common in the early days, is you're just sort of trying to figure out who you are and what your value proposition is to the world.
Yeah. I've definitely referred to myself as a super freelancer in the past, right? Because there might be a team and like, there might be like all of these clients and revenue and whatever coming in, but like ultimately it's just me doing stuff, you know what I mean? And making that transfer to the agency has been an interesting journey for myself as well. So I definitely feel you on that point.
Yeah, and that's very common. Is like, man, we did so many random things. Like one of our first deals was this company called Eat the Ball, which is like, you look them up, they're hilarious. They're a German company that was started by one of the founders of Red Bull, a guy by the name of Norbert Kreiheimer. Really smart dude. They basically had built this way to bake bread and then pressure mold it into the shape of sports balls, and then you could freeze it. But it was like you didn't need to then. It was already like made. It wasn't like bread you had to make. It was already made and freeze and could last a really long time. And so this was one of our first clients, and we actually did a deal where we brought Russell Wilson in as an equity partner in this company. And so we brokered this whole thing. We worked for them for a very long time. But at one point, we had this tiny little office that we used to call North Korea because it was so terrible. It was like the worst office ever. Inside of this office, we had a giant industrial freezer with all these packs of bread balls that we were running this like seeding and sampling program to like local little league fields and soccer fields on the weekends. And like, we had no business. It was just, you're scrambling to provide any value to these people that you can. But we just had no clarity on exactly who we were going to be and what the value proposition was and what we would take on and execute versus what we should make the client execute. And it was just a total scramble, and then we did a Kickstarter for a movie called Workhorses, which was a documentary film about college athletes being paid and got all these incredible football players. Like, it was just like the most random set of marketing initiatives ever in the early days.
Right. Yeah, I think that is pretty common, like you said, right? You kind of take what you can get until you kind of hit this point where you're like, okay, we kind of have a better sense of knowing who we are, knowing, what we are really great at, what we want to focus down on. Can you talk about when you like hit that point and like how you kind of moved into that opportunity away from kind of doing a lot of different things and just like focusing down on like the core, like super competency that you have, which obviously has led you to a lot of success,
Yeah. So I think there was just this realization that like the issue with consulting as a premise is that you're really contingent on the internal team to execute your ideas. And what we kept running into is we were frustrated with the capacity of the internal teams to execute against the vision at the standard that we wanted for ourselves. And so we wanted to be able to take on more of the responsibility of the execution of our ideas. And so our other partner, Josh, so Josh was one of the founders of Power Balance. He married a woman by the name of Natalie Golbus, who was an LPGA athlete. She was one of our sponsored athletes at Power Balance. And he had gone, and after the end of that company, he had basically traveled the world with her, caddying on tour. And then when he came back, we sat down and we're like, all right, Josh, like Taylor can do the work, Jordan can find the business. We want you to build the operational structure of this business. So he really came on and said, okay, we're going to think about hiring and teams and process and finance and figure out how we do it. And so we all had sort of our areas of discipline as a set of partners. And then our fourth partner, Corey, was really helping me on the execution side. And so that was like sort of this threshold that we crossed where we're like, okay, we need to define this. And Josh sort of is also gifted in sort of helping us think through mission, vision, values, clear communication of service offering. So that was like the step where we're like, okay, we're gonna now work towards making this transition. And don't get me wrong though, man, it's been so we are now 5 years into this journey, and we still are constantly challenging our own clarity of approach and execution and these things. And we've come a long ways to that. And one of the big things that happened along the way is my brother. So my brother's name is Casey, and he started a company called Kalo. You may have seen those silicone wedding rings. When he came to me with this product idea, him and his partner Ted, he was like, hey, we've got this idea. And we said, all right, well, we'll do this, in exchange for equity. So we ended up, me and my partners, owning basically a third of that business. So he and his partner each had a third. We had a third of that business, and we built it together. And so simultaneous to the marketing agency, we were building this consumer product brand that just took off. And it took off on the back of really our foray into Facebook advertising. And so that became, we were sort of living this growth of this consumer product e-com business and seeing very clearly what was driving it. And I was sort of playing this role of the VP of marketing of that business. So I got to really deeply understand what in that moment at that time was driving growth. And that sort of really helped us to hone in on, okay, what we're doing there is what we can bring to our clients. And that's sort of our methodology that continues is we own and operate businesses. What we see work with our own money, we bring and use that and let it drive our thinking about service business.
No, that's fascinating. I really do like that approach too. It's like a very much so like kind of a, it's almost like where like theory meets practicality, right? Because like you're not just coming to people with saying like, oh, we think this will work, right? You're saying no, we've done this for us with our money, and like that should be enough to like. I think that that's a very convincing argument to say like this is the way to do it. You know what I mean? It's not experimentation hour, which there's nothing wrong with experimentation. I highly encourage it, but like I think with a new client you could say like, look, this is a battle tested formula that we've honed with ourselves.
And I think the reality is, especially in our world, so again, when I keep saying that, I apologize. I don't know totally. I may be narrowing too much. What I mean is, again, e-commerce really for us, early stage e-commerce businesses. The reality is that the whole system of a business is really intimately linked. And so when I think about marketing, you cannot consider things like recommendations to advertising budgets and ROAS targets without considering unit economics and demand planning and cash flow. And so all of those things are so intimately linked that one of the unique things that we're able to bring to the table is that half my time is spent having conversations around demand planning and cash flow for our brands alongside marketing initiatives. And so the way that those things are intertwined and affect each other, I think is so critical for businesses to consider that if you only have a view into one part of it, I think it's hard to make recommendations that are really, really accurate and effective and consider the implications of the entirety of the business.
Absolutely. I think that too, if you don't have that information and you're trying to have like a conversation about it, you end up sounding like I do a lot of the time, which is, well, it depends. And I don't know, how much do you want? And like, let's extrapolate forwards and backwards and things like that, right? Like it becomes a very like kind of ethereal conversation until you kind of nail down those numbers. So those insights are, I think, really critical for planning for success.
And that's the thing is like a lot of times, and even more recently, we've transitioned our business into really talking about this idea of what it requires to grow an e-commerce business. And one of the things that I sort of fundamentally believe is that a lot of people come to performance marketing agencies or paid media agencies looking for profitable growth. Like that's that at the end of the day, that's what they want. They want more money in their pocket. But if you come to an agency and you only give them access and you say, here's my Facebook ad account, now I want you to create more profit in my business, it's like going to the doctor and saying, I want you to make me healthy, but you can only look at my knee, you know? And the reality is that the whole system is so intertwined that what people want is profit. What they want is money in their pocket. But the mechanism for that, I think, often gets overplayed how effective just one part of the funnel can be, and they're trying to chase this profitable growth just by driving the front end of a funnel like on Facebook advertising. But the reality is that profit probably lies in optimizing the efficiency in their supply chain or managing their OpEx or things like that that are so much deeper to creating the outcome that they want than just make my ROAS better.
The number of times I've been hired to run Facebook ads and I've ended up telling people to start a subscription service or to bundle products together is off the charts. And I'm sure that that's a similar conversation you've had.
Well, the reason you have to do that is because that's the only levers that you have control over, right? And what the reality might be is what you're solving for there is increasing the margin or the LTV, right? You're trying to say, hey, I either need to move my AOV up to create more gross margin on the product to make this work. But the reality is, like, if you had visibility to their P&L, you might find that, like, oh, wait a second, the fact that your office rent represents 4% of your overall revenue is a massive overspend on that. And actually, this whole business works if you can reduce that by, 80%. Is that possible? Like, and time again, that's what we see is that if you actually can get access into the visibility of somebody's business, you will find that the path to profitability is very rarely more efficiency at the top of the funnel. Like, and that's just the reality of it.
What I love hearing is that like you've taken this like marketing skill that you obviously have, right? And you've kind of like fused it with that like early consulting, right, that you did, right? And then kind of like created this like really clean offering that like coming to like these people and actually taking like a extremely because a lot of people say they take holistic looks at like marketing funnels and stuff, but you're taking a holistic look at like the whole business and basically helping them figure out profitability and scale and growth, and that actually makes a lot of sense then why you say we're not a digital marketing agency, we're a digital growth agency on your website. That's cool. I really like that.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, so the thing we think like we have as the highest value proposition is not actually that I have access to hundreds of millions of dollars in ad spend, which like there's lots of people that say that. It's that I have access to like hundreds of P&Ls. Like, and it's this idea that so we developed this thing we call like the 4-quarter accounting principle, which is this idea that in early stage ecom, there are 4 core levers that if you want to get to, let's say, 25% profitability, which would be an incredible outcome in ecom. Reality is most people, if you're profitable, are sitting somewhere between 10 to 20%. But if you think about it like this, like what you need to make that happen is you need your OPEX to be sub 25%, your cost of delivery to be sub 25%, and your CAC to be sub 25% of your overall revenue. Now, if you think about each of those levers, if one of them goes up, so let's say your CAC is 30% of your revenue, then somewhere in the other 3, you have to make up the delta. Otherwise, it just profit disappears. And by understanding all the available levers for us to pull on, we can sit and have a conversation that says, hey, right now we're running out, we use a metric we call MER, which is marketing efficiency rating, total revenue divided by total ad spend. And we can say, hey, right now, some people use ACOS or like these other metrics to represent just like how much money are you spending to acquire all of your revenue. But if you're sitting at its 4-to-1 MER, so 25% of your revenue, and your COGS are 40%, well, then let's take a look at your OPEX, because based on this model, if your OPEX is also 25 to 30% of your revenue, like profit doesn't exist. Like we have to figure out what is the opportunity. And because we spend so much money on paid media, we know what like the expected outcomes are. So if somebody comes to me and says like, hey, to make my business work, I need 6-to-1 on Facebook, we say, have a nice day, sir or ma'am. Like that doesn't exist. We know that the 50th percentile outcome is about 1.9 to 1 on Facebook. Like that's the stark reality that everybody needs to like understand, is that that means that for the vast majority, the actual middle of a bell curve of customers, they're spending 50% of their money on customer acquisition at the top of the funnel, right? Like, okay, so if you want to get to a better outcome, you want to move further up that curve, what does it require? And what kind of businesses does that have? And where are you getting your organic traffic? And it's like, we know the inputs that lead to the output that you want because we have sort of this wide ranging visibility to it.
That's absolutely fascinating. I love that approach. Like it's incredibly interesting, that holistic of it too, where you're just, rather than kind of banging your head against the wall trying to, get like a 5x or a 6x outcome for somebody for the top of the funnel, right? Like you're actually able to like kind of look at it and say, well, why do we need 6x? Which I think is a really powerful question.
It just won't happen, right? So it's like, if one of the things that I like to say to people is like, don't play a game where from the beginning the rules mean you lose, right? Like, so if Facebook advertising is a game and someone tells you that the rules to win the game are you have to get a 6x, I say, I don't want to play that game. Let's reconfigure the parameters of this game, because if I have to go down that path, I'm going to lose. So is there a way that we can reconfigure the game to where that we can actually use this incredibly powerful tool to win?
Absolutely. No, I love it. Well, Taylor, this has been absolutely enlightening. I've learned an incredible amount. I really appreciate your time today. I give all of my guests a minute or two at the end of the podcast to pitch whatever they want. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you that time now.
As agency owners, one of the things I'll offer to all of you is that we have a community group called youradmission.co that is a coaching community that is initially designed and intended for early stage e-com businesses that can't yet afford an agency. But what we have also found is that there are a lot of agency owners in this group, as well as internal media buying teams, where we just sort of go full open kimono and invite you into all of our buying methodologies, all of our access to docs and content and sheets and team. That we are proud of this community. We're up to about 150 to 200 entrepreneurs, somewhere in that range, of just awesome human beings that are co-journeying towards trying to make the most out of their business. If you're looking for something like that, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard nothing but great things about the community as well for some very smart, trusted marketers that I know. So yeah, definitely would recommend anybody to look into it. So Taylor, thank you so much for being here again. If you're out there listening, take a lot of these messages to heart. Don't look at just how can I get a better ROAS at the top of the funnel. Start taking a more holistic look at your business or potentially your client's business. Learn to provide value from like a business standpoint, not just a marketing standpoint. And I think you'll end up becoming indispensable and really, kind of get people the outcomes that they want and the outcomes that you want. So thank you all for listening, and happy marketing, everybody.